A poor girl found a wallet of a millionaire on Christmas Eve. In gratitude, the millionaire offered a reward, but the girl's request made him cry. Christmas Eve draped the city in a cloak of anticipation and twinkling lights. But for Leah, a 12-year-old girl with weary eyes and a patched coat, the biting cold was her only reality. She clutched a few coins in her trembling hands, all she had managed to gather by selling drawings to tourists. The distant echo of Christmas laughter and music cruelly contrasted with the silent emptiness in her stomach. "Just a few more euros," Leah murmured, her eyes fixed on the pharmacy window. The bottle of medicine her father Henri desperately needed seemed to mock her from behind the frosted glass. Henri, once a strong and cheerful man, now lay wasting away at home, consumed by an illness that free doctors couldn't adequately treat. A few blocks away, Etienne Dupont adjusted his cashmere scarf as he exited an upscale cafe. The aroma of truffles and gourmet coffee still lingered on his breath while he checked the time on his Rolex. His thoughts were far away, on business, meetings, numbers, Christmas, just another day on the calendar for someone like him. Then it happened. A moment of distraction, a careless movement, and Etienne's Italian leather wallet slipped from his pocket, landing silently on the snow-covered sidewalk. Leah, passing by at that very moment, saw the fall in slow motion. Her eyes widened as she glimpsed the bills peeking out from the wallet. That money, it could buy her father's medicine. It could buy food for weeks. It could... For a moment, just one, temptation gripped her heart like an icy fist, but then her father's voice echoed in her mind. "Honesty, my little one, is what we have left when we have nothing else." Without further hesitation, Leah grabbed the wallet and ran. Not away, but towards the well-dressed man who was quickly walking away. "Monsieur! Monsieur!" she shouted, her voice barely audible over the street's bustle. Etienne turned, irritated by the interruption, his eyes, accustomed to evaluating million-dollar deals, now focused on a child who seemed to have stepped out of a Dickens novel. "Your wallet, monsieur," Leah panted, holding out the object as if it were an offering. "You dropped it." The millionaire froze, his hand automatically touching his empty pocket. For a moment, the world seemed to spin in slow motion. He looked at the girl in front of him, her worn clothes, her flushed cheeks from the cold and the run, her eyes that shone with an honesty he hadn't seen in years in the marble corridors of his corporate empire. "Eyes, you could have kept it," Etienne murmured, more to himself than to Leah. The girl frowned, confused. "It wasn't mine, monsieur." At that moment, something inside Etienne Dupont broke, something hard and cold that he didn't even know existed. And in its place, a burning curiosity began to grow. "What's your name, little one?" he asked, his voice usually authoritative, now soft and uncertain. "Leah, monsieur. Leah Moreau." "Well, Leah Moreau," Etienne said, a genuine smile forming on his face for the first time in years. "I think you and I need to talk. How about some hot chocolate?" While Leah hesitated, her eyes involuntarily turned to the pharmacy. Etienne followed her gaze, and at that instant, he knew his life was about to change forever. What began as just another cold and lonely Christmas Eve was now the prelude to a story that neither of them could have imagined. A story of redemption, second chances, and perhaps a Christmas miracle that wouldn't come wrapped in shiny paper, but in the simplest and deepest gestures of the human heart. The rich aroma of hot chocolate enveloped Leah like a comforting blanket, a luxury she could barely remember experiencing. Sitting across from Etienne Dupont in the elegant cafe, she felt out of place, a grey smudge in a vibrant painting. "You did something extraordinary today, Leah," Etienne began, his eyes evaluating the girl with a mix of curiosity and admiration. "I want to reward you. What do you wish for?" Leah hesitated, her hands clutching the warm cup. Her eyes wandered to the window, focusing on the pharmacy across the street. The image of her father, Henri, coughing in his worn-out bed, flashed in her mind. "Monsieur," she began, her voice trembling slightly, I don't want anything for myself. But my father, he's very sick. We don't have money for his medicines." The words poured out in a rush, like a dam breaking. Tears that Leah didn't even know she was holding back began to stream down her cheeks. Etienne felt something tighten in his chest, an emotion long forgotten. Compassion. Guilt. He wasn't sure. "Tell me about your father, Leia," he asked softly. And so, between sips of hot chocolate and silent tears, Leia shared the story of Henri Moreau. Flashback. Henri Moreau was a man of easy smiles and hands calloused from honest work. Before the illness, he was the sun in Leia's small universe. Every morning he woke her with the smell of toast and the sound of his infectious laughter. "Come on, my little star," he would say, using his pet name for Leia. "The day is waiting for us." On Sundays, they would stroll through the park, Henri pushing Leia on the swing so high she swore she could touch the clouds. At night, he would read her stories, his deep voice bringing magical worlds and exciting adventures to life. But then, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, things began to change. The persistent cough, the constant fatigue, the increasingly frequent visits to the doctor. "Don't worry, my little star," Henri would assure her, but the sparkle in his eyes dimmed a little each day. End of flashback. Etienne listened in silence, his cup of coffee forgotten and cold. When Leia finished, he stood up abruptly. "Take me to your father," he said, his voice laden with a determination that surprised even himself. The Moreau apartment was a stark contrast to Etienne's luxurious world, peeling walls, worn furniture, and an air of despair that seemed to permeate every corner. In the small bedroom, Henri Moreau lay in a narrow bed, his frail body racked by coughing fits. When Etienne entered the room, Henri's eyes widened in recognition. "Monsieur Dupont," he whispered, his voice hoarse. Etienne froze. Memories long suppressed flooded his mind. Henri Moreau, the dedicated employee. The man he had unjustly fired years ago, a pawn sacrificed in the ruthless game of corporate politics. The tension in the room was palpable. Leia looked from one to the other, confused and apprehensive. Etienne felt the weight of years of selfish decisions crashing down on his shoulders. At that moment, he made a decision that would change the course of all their lives. "Monsieur Moreau," he began, his voice firm despite the emotional turmoil, "I've come to help. Allow me to pay for your treatment, for whatever is necessary." Henri tried to protest, his pride struggling against his desperate need. But one look at Leia, at the fear and hope in her eyes, silenced his objections. "Are there conditions for this help?" Henri asked cautiously. Etienne hesitated. Yes, there were conditions he didn't fully understand yet, born out of a need for redemption he barely recognized. "Just one," he finally replied, "that you allow me to be part of your lives while the treatment lasts. I need to see the outcome of my investment." It was a white lie, an excuse for something deeper that Etienne wasn't ready to admit even to himself. Leia and Henri exchanged glances. The desperation of their situation was clear. They had no choice. "We accept, Monsieur Dupont," Henri said, extending a trembling hand. As Etienne shook Henri's hand, sealing a deal that went far beyond a simple financial transaction, Leia watched with a mix of relief and apprehension. That Christmas Eve, while the city celebrated with lights and songs, 3 lives became intertwined in a way none of them could have predicted. A desperate girl, a sick father, and a millionaire haunted by his past, united by an act of honesty and the promise of redemption. The Saint-Cœur Hospital was a monument to modern medicine, its pristine white walls contrasting sharply with the modest apartment Leia and Henri had left behind. As Leia guided her father through the gleaming hallways, holding his trembling hand, she couldn't help but feel a mix of hope and apprehension. Etienne Dupont walked ahead of them, his confident steps echoing on the marble floor. To the outside world, he was the picture of control, but internally, a storm of emotions consumed him. "Monsieur Moreau," a soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "Welcome to Saint-Cœur. I am Marie Clément, and I will be your nurse during your stay with us." Marie was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a welcoming smile. There was something about her presence that immediately calmed Leia's nerves. "Let's get you comfortable, shall we?" Marie continued, guiding Henri to a private room that looked more like a luxury hotel suite. While Marie busied herself settling Henri in, Etienne pulled Leia aside. "Leia," he said, his voice low and intense, I need you to tell me everything you can about your father's work at my company. Any detail, no matter how small, could be important for his treatment. Leah frowned, confused. But Monsieur Dupont, what does that have to do with my father's illness? Etienne hesitated, realizing his mistake. It's just standard procedure, my dear, to ensure we're not missing any important information. Leah nodded, still uncertain but willing to do anything to help her father. In the days that followed, a new routine was established. Leah divided her time between the hospital and school, carrying her books through the corridors of Saint-Cœur and doing homework by her father's bedside. Marie became a constant and comforting presence, always with a kind word or a supportive gesture. Etienne, on the other hand, was an enigmatic figure. He appeared at irregular hours, sometimes spending hours talking to Henri, other times just watching from a distance. In moments when he thought no one was looking, his face contorted into a mask of guilt and remorse. One afternoon, while Henri was sleeping, Etienne found Leah in the hallway. "How is he today?" he asked, his voice betraying a concern that went beyond that of a mere benefactor. "Better, I think," Leah replied, a small smile lighting up her tired face. "Dr. Rousseau said the new medicines are working." Etienne nodded, a visible relief passing over his eyes. But then, as if remembering something important, his expression changed. "Leah," he began, hesitant, "do you remember your father ever mentioning documents? Perhaps work papers he brought home?" Leah frowned, thinking hard. "Not that I recall, monsieur. Dad always said work stayed at work." Etienne sighed, a mix of frustration and relief. Leah wasn't sure. What Leah didn't know was that while she and Henri were adjusting to their new routine at the hospital, Etienne was engulfed in a frantic investigation. He was digging through old company archives, interrogating former employees, desperately searching for something that could explain or perhaps justify his past actions. Marie, with her keen eyes and sharp intuition, didn't miss Etienne's strange behavior. She watched him from a distance, noticing how his eyes lingered on Henri with a mix of guilt and anxiety. One night, when the hospital was quiet and Henri was sleeping deeply, Marie found Etienne standing at the door of the room, staring intently at the sleeping patient. "Tiens, Monsieur Dupont," she said softly, making him jump in surprise. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. Is everything all right?" Etienne quickly composed himself, but not before Marie caught the flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. Yes, of course," he murmured. "Just checking on Monsieur Moreau's progress." Marie nodded, not convinced. "Car you know, Monsieur Dupont, in my years as a nurse, I've learned that healing often goes beyond the physical. Sometimes it's the invisible wounds that need the most attention." Etienne looked at her, surprised by the insight of her words. For a moment, it seemed like he was about to open up, confess the weight he was carrying. But then, like a curtain closing, his expression hardened. "Thank you for your concern, Mademoiselle Clément," he said coldly, "but I assure you, I am perfectly fine." With that, he turned and left quickly, leaving Marie looking at his retreating back, more convinced than ever that there was much more to this story than met the eye. While all this was happening inside the room, Henri opened his eyes slowly. He had heard the conversation, and a mix of emotions crossed his weary face. Fear, anger, confusion, and, surprisingly, a touch of compassion. "Oh, Etienne," he murmured to himself, "what have you gotten yourself into?" As the days turned into weeks, Henri's health began to show signs of improvement. His cough lessened, he gained a little weight, and a faint glow returned to his eyes. Leah watched these changes with a heart full of hope and gratitude. But as Henri grew stronger, the shadows in Etienne's eyes seemed to deepen. He spent more and more time at the hospital, often lost in thought, other times engaged in intense and whispered conversations with Henri when he thought no one was looking. One afternoon, Leah returned from school to find her father sitting up in bed, a serious expression on his face. "Come, my little star," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "We need to talk about Monsieur Dupont." Leah felt a chill run down her spine. Something in her father's voice, in the atmosphere of the room, told her that what was coming next would change everything. Meanwhile, outside the room, Etienne stood frozen, his hand paused in the act of knocking on the door. He had made a decision. It was time to confront his past, to reveal the truth, no matter the consequences. The Hospital Saint-Cœur, with its white walls and air of healing, was about to become the stage for a revelation that would shake the foundations of all their lives. The truth, like a long-dammed river, was about to burst its barriers, sweeping along years of secrets, lies, and hard-won redemptions. And in the middle of it all, Leah, a girl who only wanted to see her father healthy again, was about to discover that the world of adults was much more complicated and darker than she could ever have imagined. The pale light of dawn filtered through the windows of the Hospital Saint-Cœur. Finding Etienne Dupont sitting in an uncomfortable chair in the corridor, his face marked by fatigue and remorse. The silence was broken only by the rhythmic beeping of machines and the occasional whisper of nurses passing by. Marie approached, 2 cups of coffee in her hands. She offered one to Etienne, who accepted it with a grateful nod. "Monsieur Dupont," Marie began, her voice gentle but firm, "I think it's time for you to tell us the truth, all of it." Etienne sighed deeply, looking into the dark liquid in his cup as if he could find answers there. "You're right," he said finally. "Everyone deserves to know the truth. Especially Leah." At that moment, Leah emerged from her father's room, her eyes swollen from crying. Camille, who had spent the night at the hospital, quickly stood up to embrace her. "Leah," Etienne called softly, "there's something you need to know. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Flashback 10 years ago. The office of Etienne Dupont at Dupont Industries buzzed with activity. The company was on the verge of closing the biggest contract in its history, a deal that would catapult it to the top of the global market. Henri Moreau, then a junior financial manager, knocked on Etienne's door, his face pale and worried. "Monsieur Dupont," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "I found some discrepancies in the project's numbers. I think someone is embezzling funds." Etienne frowned, automatically reaching for the papers Henri handed him. "That's a serious accusation, Henri. Are you sure?" Henri nodded gravely. "Absolutely. The numbers don't lie." But before they could investigate further, the door burst open. Bernard Lefebvre, the CFO of the company, stormed in, his face a mask of fury. "What's going on here?" he demanded. Etienne, caught off guard, hesitated. It was the moment Bernard needed. "Etienne, we caught Henri trying to access confidential files. He's trying to sabotage the deal." Henri paled. "What? No, I was just—" "Silence," Bernard roared. "We have proof, Moreau. You're fired. Get out now before we call security." Etienne, overwhelmed by the rapidity of events and the pressure of the impending contract closure, didn't have time to process what was happening. "Henri, I'm sorry," he murmured, unable to look into the shocked eyes of his employee. Henri, betrayed and devastated, left the office in silence, leaving behind not only his job but also his dignity and trust in the system he had sworn to serve. End of flashback. Leah listened to the story with growing horror, tears welling up in her eyes. You fired my father unjustly," she whispered, her voice breaking with disbelief. Etienne nodded miserably. "I failed your father, Leah. I should have investigated more, should have trusted him. But I was so focused on the company's success that I ignored my conscience." Camille, who had been listening in silence, suddenly let out a bitter laugh. "Typical. Always work first, isn't it, Dad?" Etienne turned to his daughter, noticing for the first time how she protectively cradled her own belly. His eyes widened in realization. "Camille," he began, his voice trembling. "Are you pregnant?" Camille completed defiantly. "Yes, and planning to run away from home." Surprise. The silence that followed was deafening. Marie, sensing the growing tension, decided to intervene. Perhaps we should all calm down, but she was interrupted by a sound coming from Henri's room. Leah rushed inside, followed closely by the others. Henri was awake, his eyes filled with understanding and fear. "You know," Henri said. It wasn't a question. Etienne nodded, pulling the documents from his pocket. "Do I know everything, Henri? The embezzlement, the dummy accounts, everything. Why did you do it?" Henri closed his eyes, tears escaping from the corners. I had no choice, Etienne. They threatened my family. His words were interrupted by a violent coughing fit. Alarms began to sound, and the heart monitor showed a worrying frequency. Etienne recoiled, horrified. Henri! Henri! Marie rushed into the room, followed by a medical team. Monsieur Dupont, you need to leave now. As he was pushed out of the room, Etienne saw Leah and Camille running down the corridor, terror in their young faces. Papa! Leah cried, trying to enter the room. Camille held her back, pulling her into a hug. Poik, let the doctors work, Leah, she whispered, her own voice trembling. Etienne watched the scene, feeling the weight of his actions crashing down on him. He had sought the truth with such determination, and now he might have cost Henri his life. The next few hours passed in a blur of frantic activity and anxious waiting. Leah cried silently in Camille's arms, who cast accusing glances at her father. Marie came and went, her face a mask of professional concern. Finally, Dr. Rousseau emerged from the room, looking exhausted. We've stabilized him, he announced, but the stress caused a significant setback in his condition. We'll need to adjust the treatment. Leah sobbed with relief, burying her face in Camille's shoulder. Etienne, for his part, felt like the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Can I see him? Leah asked timidly. Dr. Rousseau nodded. Briefly. He needs absolute rest now. While Leah entered the room hesitantly, Camille turned to her father, her eyes filled with disappointment and anger. What have you done? She hissed. What could be so important to risk someone's life like this? Etienne opened his mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. How could he explain that the search for truth, for redemption, had turned into something so destructive? Marie, watching the scene, made a decision. She approached Etienne, her voice low but firm. Monsieur Dupont, I think we need to talk. About the documents Marie found in Henri's room. Etienne stared at her, shocked. The truth, it seemed, was about to come out in ways he could never have predicted. While this was happening, inside the quiet room, Leah held her father's hand, silent tears streaming down her face. Please, Papa, she whispered. Please, stay with me. The night stretched on, long and somber, over the hospital Saint-Cœur. Secrets and lies hung in the air like restless ghosts, and the fragile web of connections between Etienne, Henri, Leah, Camille, and Marie seemed ready to break under the weight of the impending truth. The faint light of dawn filtered through the windows of the hospital Saint-Cœur, finding Etienne Dupont sitting in an uncomfortable chair in the corridor, his face marked by fatigue and remorse. The silence was broken only by the rhythmic beeping of machines and the occasional whisper of nurses passing by. Marie approached, 2 cups of coffee in her hands. She offered one to Etienne, who accepted it with a grateful nod. Monsieur Dupont, Marie began, her voice gentle but firm, I think it's time for you to tell us the truth, all of it. Etienne sighed deeply, looking into the dark liquid in his cup as if he could find answers there. You're right, he said finally. Everyone deserves to know the truth. Especially Leah. At that moment, Leah emerged from her father's room, her eyes swollen from crying. Camille, who had spent the night at the hospital, quickly stood up to embrace her. Leah, Etienne called softly. There's something you need to know. Something I should have told you a long time ago. Flashback 10 years ago. The office of Etienne Dupont at Dupont Industries buzzed with activity. The company was on the verge of closing the biggest contract in its history, a deal that would catapult it to the top of the global market. Henri Moreau, then a junior financial manager, knocked on Etienne's door, his face pale and worried. Monsieur Dupont, he said, his voice trembling slightly. I found some discrepancies in the project's numbers. I think someone is embezzling funds. Etienne frowned, automatically reaching for the papers Henri handed him. That's a serious accusation, Henri. Are you sure? Henri nodded gravely. Absolutely. The numbers don't lie. But before they could investigate further, the door burst open. Bernard Lefebvre, the CFO of the company, stormed in, his face a mask of fury. What's going on here? He demanded. Etienne, caught off guard, hesitated. It was the moment Bernard needed. Etienne, We caught Henri trying to access confidential files. He's trying to sabotage the deal. Henri paled. What? No, I was just... Silence, Bernard roared. We have proof, Moreau. You're fired. Get out now before we call security. Etienne, overwhelmed by the rapidity of events and the pressure of the impending contract closure, didn't have time to process what was happening. Henri, I'm sorry, he murmured, unable to look into the shocked eyes of his employee. Henri, betrayed and devastated, left the office in silence, leaving behind not only his job but also his dignity and trust in the system he had sworn to serve. End of flashback. Leia listened to the story with growing horror, tears welling up in her eyes. You fired my father unjustly, she whispered, her voice breaking with disbelief. Etienne nodded miserably. I failed your father, Leia. I should have investigated more, should have trusted him. But I was so focused on the company's success that I ignored my conscience. Camille, who had been listening in silence, suddenly let out a bitter laugh. Typical. Always work first, isn't it, Dad? Etienne turned to his daughter, noticing for the first time how she protectively cradled her own belly. His eyes widened in realization. Camille, he began, his voice trembling. Are you pregnant? Camille completed defiantly. Yes, and planning to run away from home. Surprise. The silence that followed was deafening. Marie, sensing the growing tension, decided to intervene. Perhaps we should all calm down but she was interrupted by a sound coming from Henri's room. Leia rushed inside, followed closely by the others. Henri was awake, his eyes filled with understanding and fear. You know, Henri said. It wasn't a question. Etienne nodded, pulling the documents from his pocket. Do I know everything, Henri? The embezzlement, the dummy accounts, everything. Why did you do it? Henri closed his eyes, tears escaping from the corners. I had no choice, Etienne. They threatened my family. His words were interrupted by a violent coughing fit. Alarms began to sound, and the heart monitor showed a worrying frequency. Etienne recoiled, horrified. Henri! Marie rushed into the room, followed by a medical team. Monsieur Dupont, you need to leave now. As he was pushed out of the room, Etienne saw Leia and Camille running down the corridor, terror in their young faces. Papa! Leia cried, trying to enter the room. Camille held her back, pulling her into a hug. Let the doctors work, Leia, she whispered, her own voice trembling. Etienne watched the scene, feeling the weight of his actions crashing down on him. He had sought the truth with such determination, and now he might have cost Henri his life. The next few hours passed in a blur of frantic activity and anxious waiting. Leia cried silently in Camille's arms, who cast accusing glances at her father. Marie came and went, her face a mask of professional concern. Finally, Dr. Rousseau emerged from the room, looking exhausted. We've stabilized him, he announced, but the stress caused a significant setback in his condition. We'll need to adjust the treatment. Leia sobbed with relief, burying her face in Camille's shoulder. Etienne, for his part, felt like the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Can I see him? Leia asked timidly. Dr. Rousseau nodded. Briefly. He needs absolute rest now. While Leia entered the room hesitantly, Camille turned to her father, her eyes filled with disappointment and anger. What have you done? She hissed. What could be so important to risk someone's life like this? Etienne opened his mouth to respond but the words wouldn't come. How could he explain that the search for truth, for redemption, had turned into something so destructive? Marie, watching the scene, made a decision. She approached Etienne, her voice low but firm. Monsieur Dupont, I think we need to talk. About the documents Marie found in Henri's room. Etienne stared at her, shocked. The truth, it seemed, was about to come out in ways he could never have predicted. While this was happening, inside the quiet room, Leia held her father's hand, silent tears streaming down her face. Please, Papa, she whispered. Please, stay with me. The night stretched on, long and somber, over the hospital Saint-Cœur. Secrets and lies hung in the air like restless ghosts, and the fragile web of connections between Etienne, Henri, Leah, Camille, and Marie seemed ready to break under the weight of the impending truth. The small apartment of the Moreaus had never felt so cramped and suffocating to Leah as it did that afternoon. With Henri still in the hospital, the silence was oppressive, broken only by the incessant ticking of the old wall clock. Leah took a deep breath, gathering her courage. The words of her father echoed in her mind. The proof. In the apartment, safe behind the painting. With trembling hands, she began to examine each painting on the wall. Family portraits, faded landscapes. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, until her eyes fell on a simple painting of a sunset, slightly askew. Her heart raced. Carefully, she removed the painting, revealing a small wall safe embedded in the wall. Her fingers traced the metallic outline, the reality of the situation finally settling in. Whatever was inside could change everything. At that moment, a knock at the door startled her. Leah froze, fearing it might be Etienne. To her relief, it was Camille's voice on the other side. "Leah, it's me. Can I come in?" Leah opened the door, finding Camille with a determined look in her eyes. "I thought you might need some help," Camille said, entering the apartment. Her eyes immediately noticed the exposed safe. "You found it." Leah nodded, grateful for her friend's presence. "But I don't know the combination." Camille smiled, a glint of challenge in her eyes. "Well, we'll have to get creative, won't we?" Meanwhile, at the hospital Saint-Cœur, Etienne paced back and forth in the corridor, his phone pressed to his ear. "So what do you mean by irregularities?" he hissed, his voice tense. "Bernard, I need clear answers. Our market position is—" "I understand. Don't do anything until I get there." Hanging up the call, Etienne ran a hand through his hair, the tension evident in every line of his face. The news of current business troubles couldn't have come at a worse time. Determined, he headed towards Henri's room. He needed answers, and he needed them now. However, as he reached the door, he was intercepted by Marie. "Monsieur Dupont," she said, her voice firm. "I'm sorry, but Henri is not in a condition to receive visitors at the moment." Etienne frowned. "What happened?" Marie hesitated, clearly torn between her professional duty and her growing suspicion about Etienne's intentions. "There have been complications," she finally said. "We are conducting more tests. In fact, I found some inconsistencies in Henri's medical history that are concerning me." Etienne felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of inconsistencies?" Before Marie could respond, alarms sounded inside Henri's room. In seconds, a medical team rushed in, leaving Etienne and Marie paralyzed in the corridor. Back at the apartment, Leah and Camille were huddled over the safe, trying every combination they could think of that might have meaning to Henri. "Birth date?" Camille suggested. Leah tried or nothing. "Anniversary date?" Again, no success. Frustrated, Leah threw herself onto the sofa. "It's useless. We'll never guess it." Camille sat beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Don't give up, Leah. There must be something we're missing. Something important to your dad, something he would never forget." Leah closed her eyes, thinking intensely. Suddenly, a memory surfaced. Her father, smiling, calling her "my little star" for the first time. The date when he started using that pet name. With her heart racing, Leah stood up and dialed the date into the safe. With a soft click, the door opened. "We did it," Camille exclaimed, hugging Leah. Inside the safe, a thick envelope awaited. Leah picked it up with trembling hands, feeling the weight of the truth in her hands. At the hospital, the situation was chaotic. Henri had collapsed, his condition now critical. Etienne watched helplessly as the doctors fought to stabilize him. Marie approached, her face grave. "Monsieur Dupont, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Is there any chance Henri was exposed to toxic substances during his time at Dupont Industries?" Etienne felt the world spinning. "What? No, that's impossible. We followed all safety protocols." But as the words left his mouth, a terrible doubt began to form in his mind. "And if?" His phone vibrated, bringing him back to reality. A A message from his assistant. Urgent. Company stocks in free fall. Rumors of fraud spreading. Press at the headquarters. Door. Etienne felt as if the ground was disappearing beneath his feet. Everything was crumbling at once. Back at the apartment, Leah opened the envelope with Camille by her side. Documents, photos, and a USB drive fell onto the table. "Oh my God," Camille whispered, her eyes wide as she examined the papers. "Leah, this is big, really big." Leah picked up one of the photos, her heart almost stopping as she recognized the figures. Her father, much younger, standing beside Etienne and another man she didn't know. All of them smiling, seeming to celebrate something. On the back of the photo, a date and a note. Project Phoenix initiated. God help us. "Camille," Leah said, her voice trembling, "I think we just opened Pandora's box." At that moment, Leah's phone rang. It was Marie. "Leah, you need to come to the hospital immediately." "It's your father. Marie's voice faltered, leaving the rest of the sentence hanging in the air like a dark cloud. Meanwhile, Etienne, torn between the chaos at his company and the crisis at the hospital, did the only thing he could. He called his lawyer. "Pierre, get ready. I think the past has finally caught up with us." The truth, long buried, was about to come to light. And with it, the promise of redemption, justice, and perhaps a new beginning. The small apartment of the Moreaus was immersed in tense silence, broken only by the metallic sound of the safe dial turning repeatedly. Leah and Camille sat on the floor, their foreheads furrowed in concentration as they tried once again to decipher the combination. "Mom's birth date?" Camille suggested, her voice betraying a touch of frustration. Leah shook her head, turning the dial again. "Already tried. Nothing." Leah's phone vibrated, making both girls jump. It was a message from Marie. "Condition worsened. Come to the hospital as soon as you can." Leah felt her heart tighten. "We need to hurry," she murmured, tears threatening to fall. Camille squeezed Leah's shoulder in a supportive gesture. "We'll figure it out. Your dad trusted you to find this. There must be something we're missing." At the Hospital Saint-Cœur, Etienne paced the waiting room, his phone pressed to his ear. "No, don't sell anything yet. Keep all investors calm. I'll sort this out," he hissed, hanging up afterward. Marie approached, her face a mask of professional concern. "Monsieur Dupont, we need to talk." Etienne turned, noticing the seriousness in Marie's tone. "What happened? Henri?" "His condition is deteriorating rapidly," Marie explained. "But there's more. I found anomalies in his tests that don't match the original diagnosis. Etienne, I need to know, is there something in Henri's past, something related to his work at your company, that could explain this?" Etienne felt his blood run cold. The implications of Marie's question were devastating. Before he could respond, Camille appeared in the corridor, her face a mix of fear and determination. "Dad, we need to talk." Now, Etienne looked from Marie to Camille, feeling cornered. "Camille, this isn't the time." "It is exactly the time," Camille interrupted. "I'm pregnant." Etienne felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. "Pregnant," he repeated, incredulous. "But how? Who?" "Does it matter?" Camille retorted, tears of anger shining in her eyes. "What matters is that I need my dad now, but he's too busy trying to cover up his past mistakes." Marie, sensing the escalating tension, tried to intervene. "Maybe we should all calm down and—" But she was interrupted by the shrill ring of Etienne's phone. He answered, his face paling even more at the voice on the other end. "Monsieur Dupont? This is Maître Laurent. We have a problem, a big problem." Back at the apartment, Leah was on the verge of giving up when a sudden memory struck her. Her father, smiling, talking about the day he decided to become an accountant. "It was like the universe aligned, my little star," he had said. Since the numbers finally made sense. With trembling hands, Leah turned the dial, entering the date of that day. A soft click echoed through the room. "We did it!" Camille exclaimed, hugging Leah. The safe opened, revealing a pile of documents, a USB drive, and a small black notebook. Leah picked up the notebook, opening it carefully. The first page contained only one sentence: the truth about Project Phoenix. At the hospital, Etienne listened to the lawyer's voice, his face a mask of growing horror. A former employee is threatening to go public with information about questionable company practices. He mentions Project Phoenix very specifically and claims to have concrete evidence. Etienne felt the world spinning. Project Phoenix, a name he had buried years ago, along with memories of questionable decisions and compromised ethics. "What does he want?" Etienne asked, his voice hoarse. "It's not money he wants, Monsieur Dupont," the lawyer replied. "He wants justice and a public confession." At that moment, Marie reappeared, her face grave. "Monsieur Dupont, Henri is asking for you. He doesn't have much time." Etienne felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. On one side, his company and reputation were on the brink of collapse. On the other, a man he had wronged years ago was dying. Camille watched her father, a mix of pity and disappointment in her eyes. "What are you going to do, Dad?" Before Etienne could respond, Leah burst into the corridor, breathless, holding the black notebook. "Monsieur Dupont," she panted, "we found it, the proof, Project Phoenix." Etienne's eyes widened in shock. He looked from Leah to the notebook, to Camille, to Marie, and finally to the closed door of Henri's room. At that moment, he knew he was at a point of no return. "Marie," he said, his voice surprisingly calm, "please, take me to Henri. It's time to face the truth." As the group moved towards the room, Etienne's phone vibrated again. A message from the mysterious lawyer. "Last chance, Dupont. Confess or face the consequences. The choice is yours." Etienne took a deep breath, pocketing the phone. As he entered Henri's room, he knew that the next words he spoke would change the course of many lives. The safe of secrets had been opened, and there was no going back. The heart monitor beeped steadily, a somber reminder of the fragility of life. Leah rushed to her father's side, holding his hand. Camille stood by the door, watching the scene with a mix of emotions. Etienne approached the bed, feeling the weight of years of secrets and regrets. "Henri," he began, his voice trembling. I'm sorry for everything." Henri's eyes opened slowly, focusing on Etienne. A small smile formed on his pale lips. "Finally," he whispered, "the truth." Leah opened the notebook, her voice trembling slightly as she began to read. "Project Phoenix, a study on the long-term effects of exposure to..." As the words flowed, filling the room with long-buried truths, the air seemed to grow heavier. Marie listened, horrified by the medical implications of what was being revealed. Camille watched her father, seeing him age years in minutes. And Etienne, confronted with the outcome of his past actions, finally understood the true cost of his ambition. At that moment, the phone in Etienne's pocket rang. It was a message from the mysterious lawyer. "Last chance, Dupont. Confess or face the consequences. The choice is yours." The silence that followed Leah's reading was almost palpable in Henri's hospital room. Leah, with the notebook still open in her trembling hands, looked incredulously at Etienne Dupont. The words she had just read echoed in her mind, revealing a truth she could barely comprehend. "So, my father was innocent all along?" she whispered, her voice laden with emotion. "And you knew?" Etienne, pale and visibly shaken, couldn't find the words. His eyes wandered from Leah's accusing gaze to Henri's frail figure in the hospital bed, and then to Camille, who looked at him with a mix of shock and disappointment. I didn't know everything," Etienne finally managed to say, his voice hoarse. "But yes, I suspected that Henri wasn't guilty. I let others convince me otherwise." Marie, who had listened to everything in silence, stepped forward. "Monsieur Dupont, regardless of what happened in the past, there is an urgent matter we need to address." She paused, looking at Henri. "Henri needs a bone marrow transplant. Immediately." The news hit like a bomb in the already tense room. Leah let out a sob, while Camille instinctively placed her hand over her own belly. "How much time does he have?" Etienne asked, his voice trembling. "Days, perhaps," Marie replied gravely. "We need to find a compatible donor as soon as possible." At that moment, Etienne's phone vibrated. It was a message from the hospital. Results of the compatibility tests are available. Please come to the laboratory immediately. Etienne felt a chill run down his spine. He had taken the compatibility test days ago, more out of guilt than any real expectation. Now, he faced the possibility of being the only one who could save Henri's life. I need to check something, he murmured, rushing out of the room. While Etienne was gone, Camille approached Leah, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Leah," she began hesitantly, "there's something I need to tell you. With everything that's happening, I've decided to keep the baby." Leah looked at her friend, momentarily distracted from her own anguish. "Oh, Camille, I know it's crazy," Camille continued, her voice trembling slightly, "but after seeing all this wasted life with secrets and lies, I want to do something honest, something pure." Leah hugged Camille, feeling the weight of the decisions they both faced. "I'm here for you," she whispered. Meanwhile, in the laboratory, Etienne faced the doctor with a mix of fear and hope. "Monsieur Dupont," the doctor said, "the results show that you are a compatible donor for Henri Moreau." Etienne felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. He had the power to save the life of Henri, the man he had wronged so many years ago. But in doing so, he would be exposing himself to issues that could destroy everything he had built. Back in Henri's room, Leah was immersed in dark thoughts. The documents in her hands were a weapon she could use to force Etienne to do the transplant, to make up for years of injustice. But using the evidence that way, wouldn't that make her just as bad as the actions she despised? Etienne's return to the room was marked by a heavy silence. His eyes met Leah's, and in that moment, both knew they were at a moral crossroads. "I am compatible," Etienne announced, his voice firm despite the emotional turmoil. "I can donate the bone marrow for Henri." Leah felt a wave of relief, quickly followed by suspicion. "And you will do it?" she asked, her tone challenging. Before Etienne could respond, his phone rang. It was the mysterious lawyer again. "Monsieur Dupont, we need your decision now. Confess publicly or face us in court and in the media." Etienne looked at the phone, then at Henri, and finally at Leah, who still held the incriminating documents. "Dixon," he began, his voice faltering. At that moment, Henri, who had been silent until then, spoke with a weak voice. "Do the right thing, Etienne. Not for others, but for yourself." The room fell silent, everyone's eyes on Etienne. He was at the center of a moral storm, each decision carrying the weight of lives and legacies. Leah, holding the documents that could destroy Etienne, faced her own dilemma. Using the proof as blackmail would ensure the transplant for her father, but at what cost to her own integrity? Camille watched her father, seeing for the first time the man behind the facade of power and success. A man who was afraid, regretful, facing the consequences of a lifetime of questionable decisions. Marie, the silent guardian, waited for the decision that could save or condemn her patient, and Etienne, in the eye of the storm, knew that the next step he took would define not only his future, but the future of everyone around him. "I will do the transplant," he finally said, his voice gaining strength as he spoke, "and I will confess everything." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Leah, with tears in her eyes, handed the documents to Etienne. "This is yours," she said softly. "Close them to do the right thing." Etienne took the papers, the weight of them feeling much heavier than they should. He looked at Camille, a silent plea for forgiveness in his eyes. "I will be better," he promised, "for all of you." As the night fell over the hospital, the intertwined lives in that room prepared for a new journey. A journey of redemption, of healing, and of second chances. Chapter 8 came to an end, but the story was far from over. The moral crossroads had been navigated, and the path ahead, though uncertain, promised the possibility of a new dawn. Etienne Dupont's office at Dupont Industries, once a symbol of power and success, now felt like a prison of glass and steel. Sitting behind his imposing desk, Etienne stared at the phone in front of him, the hospital's number flashing on the screen, begging to be dialed. The decision to donate bone marrow to Henri weighed on him like an anchor. It wasn't just the physical risks that concerned him, but the implications of his act. Donating meant admitting his guilt, exposing himself to scrutiny that could destroy everything he had built. A soft knock at the door interrupted his dark thoughts. Leah entered, her face a mask of determination mixed with hesitation. "Monsieur Dupont," she began, her voice trembling slightly. I need to speak with you." Etienne nodded, gesturing for her to sit down. Leah approached, placing a folder on the desk. "These are the documents we found," she said. "They prove my father's innocence and," she hesitated, "and your guilt in the fraud." Etienne felt the weight of the world crashing down on his shoulders. He reached out, touching the folder with trembling fingers. "Are you going to use them against me?" he asked, his voice low and defeated. Leah closed her eyes, struggling with the emotions warring inside her. "I want to," she admitted. "Part of me wants to force you to do the transplant, to make up for what my father has suffered. But," she opened her eyes, looking straight at Etienne, "wouldn't that make me just like you?" The silence that followed was deafening. Etienne looked at the young girl in front of him, seeing in her a moral strength he had long lost. At that moment, the door burst open. Camille stormed in, her eyes red from crying. "Is it true?" she demanded, looking at her father. "All of this? The fraud? The injustice against Leah's father?" Etienne felt his heart break at the pain and disappointment in his daughter's eyes. "Camille, don't lie to me," she shouted. "No more lies." Etienne slumped in his chair, defeated. "Yes," he whispered. "It's true." Camille sobbed, covering her face with her hands. Leah rushed to her side, hugging her instinctively. Back at the hospital, Marie worked tirelessly, preparing Henri for the possible transplant. She checked monitors, adjusted medications, all while fighting against time and the deterioration of her patient's health. "Come on, Henri," she murmured, checking his vital signs. "Hang in there. Help is on the way." Back in the office, the tense silence was shattered by the ringing of Etienne's phone. It was the mysterious lawyer. "Monsieur Dupont," the voice on the other end said gravely, "I have a final proposal for you. We can cover up the fraud, protect your reputation and your company, but the price—" "What is the price?" Etienne asked, his voice hoarse. "Sacrifice Henri Moreau. Let him die without the transplant. His death will close all investigations." Etienne felt nauseous. He looked at Leah and Camille, who watched him with a mix of fear and expectation. I need time to think," he stammered, hanging up the phone. Leah and Camille exchanged glances, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on them. "What are we going to do?" Camille whispered, looking at the documents on the desk. Leah hesitated. "I don't know. Using the proof feels wrong, but doing nothing is also wrong," Camille completed, nodding. Etienne watched the interaction between the two, feeling a wave of shame and regret wash over him. He had created this impossible situation, placing the burden of moral decisions on the shoulders of two young girls who should be worried about entirely different things. Suddenly, Leah's phone rang. It was Marie, her voice urgent and frightened. "Leah, you need to come to the hospital right now. Your father is in a coma." The world seemed to freeze. Leah dropped the phone, her face pale with shock. "Papa," she whispered. Camille hugged her immediately, looking at her own father with a mix of anger and pleading. Etienne stood up, feeling the weight of each decision he had made over the years. He walked to the window, looking out at the city, oblivious to the drama unfolding within that office. Conscience, that voice long ignored, now screamed in his mind. The lives of Henri, Leah, Camille, and so many others, affected by his actions over the years, weighed heavily on him. Turning around, he looked at Leah and Camille. "Let's go to the hospital," he said, his voice firm for the first time in days. "It's time to do the right thing." As they rushed out of the office, Etienne made a quick call. "Maître Laurent, prepare the papers for a full confession and cancel any deal with that mysterious lawyer. I am taking full responsibility for my actions." At the hospital, Marie watched the monitors with growing concern. Henri's condition was deteriorating rapidly. "Please," she murmured, both a prayer and a professional plea, "just a little more time." Chapter 10. The Hour of Truth. The hospital Saint-Cœur was steeped in a tense quiet on that Christmas Eve. The corridors, usually bustling with life and movement, seemed to hold their breath, as if the very institution sensed the weight of the decisions about to be made within its walls. Etienne Dupont stood by the window of Henri's room, watching the snowflakes fall softly outside. His reflection in the glass showed a man aged not just by years, but by the burden of his choices. With a deep sigh, he turned to face Marie, who waited patiently for his final decision. "I will do it," he said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "I will donate the bone marrow for Henri." Marie nodded, a flicker of relief crossing her professional face. "Do you understand the risks, Monsieur Dupont?" "Yes," Etienne replied, a sad smile playing on his lips. "And I am willing to face them. It is the least I can do." As Marie left to begin the preparations, Leah entered the room, her eyes red from crying, but with a fierce determination in her gaze. She held the folder with the incriminating documents tightly in her hands. "Monsieur Dupont," she began, her voice trembling slightly, I think you should show this to my father. He deserves to know the truth, even if—" Her voice faltered, unable to complete the thought. Etienne felt a mix of fear and respect for the young girl's courage. He nodded slowly. "You are right, Leah. Henri deserves to know everything. And I will be here to face the consequences." Flashback. 20 years ago, Etienne and Henri were young and ambitious, working side by side at Dupont Industries. They celebrated the closing of a major contract, champagne glasses clinking in the brightly lit office. "To the future," Etienne toasted, his eyes shining with the promise of success. "To the future," Henri echoed, a genuine smile on his face. "And to our friendship." Little did they know that this moment of triumph would be the prelude to a series of decisions that would set them on vastly different paths. End of flashback. Back in the present, Camille burst into the room, her eyes flashing with anger and disappointment. "Yes, how could you?" she demanded, confronting her father. "All those lessons about integrity, about doing the right thing, were they all lies?" Etienne felt the weight of each word like a physical blow. "Camille, No," she interrupted. "I don't want excuses. I want to understand. Why?" Flashback. 10 years ago, Etienne sat in his office, staring at a pile of documents revealing alarming financial discrepancies. His phone rang. "Monsieur Dupont, Bernard Lefebvre, the CFO, said urgently, 'We need to act now. If this information gets out, the company won't survive.'" Etienne hesitated, his finger hovering over the button that would summon Henri to his office. A decision, a moment, the fate of many hanging in the balance. "Do what needs to be done, Bernard," he finally said, hanging up the phone and burying his head in his hands. End of flashback. "I thought I was protecting something bigger," Etienne admitted, his voice laden with regret. "The company, the jobs, the legacy. But in the process, I lost sight of what really mattered." Camille looked at him, tears silently streaming down her face. "And now?" "Now," Etienne replied, straightening his shoulders, "I do the right thing, no matter the cost." At that moment, Marie returned, accompanied by a medical team. "We are ready to begin the preparations for the surgery," she announced. As the team began their work, Etienne's phone vibrated. It was the mysterious lawyer again. "Your last chance, Dupont," the voice threatened. "IZE. Accept our offer of a cover-up or face total destruction." Etienne looked at Leah, who held Henri's hand, at Camille, who watched him with a mix of fear and hope, and at Marie, whose professional dedication never wavered. "No," he replied firmly. "It's over. I will face the consequences of my actions, all of them." Hanging up the phone, he turned to Leah. "Famissa, it's time," he said softly. "Show Henri the truth. He deserves to know before the surgery." Leah nodded, her hands trembling as she opened the folder. She began to read the documents aloud, her voice choked with emotion. As the truth was revealed, flashbacks of Henri and Etienne's lives unfolded like a film. Flashback. Henri, young and idealistic, discovering the first inconsistencies in the company's accounts. Etienne, pressured by investors and the board, making the fateful decision to cover up the truth. The day of Henri's dismissal, the shock and betrayal in his eyes as he was escorted out of the building. Years of struggle, Henri trying to rebuild his life, Etienne ascending to the top of the corporate world, both carrying the weight of secrets left unsaid. End of flashback. As Leia finished reading, a heavy silence fell over the room. It was broken by the soft, almost imperceptible sound of Henri's voice. I heard everything," he murmured, his eyes opening slowly. Leia let out a sob of relief, squeezing her father's hand. Etienne stepped forward, the weight of 2 decades of guilt visible in every line of his face. "Henri, No," Henri interrupted softly. "Not now. After the surgery." Marie, sensing the intensity of the moment, gently intervened. "We need to begin the preparations now," she said. As the medical team moved around them, Camille approached her father. "I will be here," she said, her voice a mix of emotions. "When you come out of surgery." Etienne nodded, tears shining in his eyes. "Thank you, ma chérie." Leia, immersed in thoughts, watched the scene unfold. The documents in her hands were a weapon she could use, but at what cost? Outside, the bells of a distant church began to toll, announcing the arrival of Christmas Eve. Inside the hospital room, a group of unlikely individuals prepared for a night that would change their lives forever. As Etienne was led away for the surgical preparations, he cast one last look back. He saw Leia, holding Henri's hand tightly. He saw Camille, her eyes reflecting a mix of fear and pride. And he saw Marie, the silent guardian who had witnessed the entire saga unfold. The hour of truth had arrived. And with it, the promise of redemption, forgiveness, and perhaps a new beginning. Christmas morning dawned cold and quiet at the hospital Saint-Cœur. The corridors, usually bustling with life and movement, were eerily still, as if the very building held its breath in anticipation. In the waiting room, Leia and Camille sat side by side, their hands entwined in a gesture of mutual support. Leia's eyes were fixed on the double doors leading to the surgical center, as if she could see through them to where her father and Etienne were. "How much longer?" Camille whispered, breaking the tense silence. Leia shook her head, unable to form words. The waiting was agonizing, each minute stretching like hours. Inside the surgical room, the medical team worked with meticulous precision. The steady beep of the heart monitors for Henri and Etienne was the only sound besides the occasional instructions from the chief surgeon. Marie, in her surgical gown, moved between the 2 operating tables, checking vital signs and administering medications. Her eyes, visible above her mask, were focused and determined. Meanwhile, Etienne, under the influence of anesthesia, floated through a sea of memories and visions. Etienne's vision. He saw himself young again, walking the corridors of DuPont Industries. Henri was by his side, both laughing and discussing ambitious plans for the future. The scene changed. Now he was in his office, signing the papers that would seal Henri's fate. The pen in his hand felt like it weighed a ton. Flashes of crucial moments passed before his eyes. The company's rise, the birth of Camille, the lonely nights working late, the admiring and envious glances of others. And then, like a film rewinding, he saw all the missed opportunities to do the right thing, to correct his mistakes, to be the man he always wanted to be. End of vision. In the waiting room, the tension was palpable. Leia stood up abruptly, unable to sit still any longer. "And if," she began but couldn't finish the sentence. Camille stood up as well, placing her hands on Leia's shoulders. "They will be fine," she said, with more conviction than she actually felt. "They have to be." The sun rose higher in the sky, casting a pale light through the hospital windows. Nurses passed occasionally, offering coffee and kind words of encouragement. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the double doors of the surgical center opened. Marie stepped out, removing her surgical mask. Leia and Camille froze, their hearts racing. "The surgery was a success," Marie announced, a genuine smile of relief on her face. "Both are stable and being taken to recovery." A collective sigh of relief echoed through the room. Leia fell to her knees, tears of gratitude streaming down her face. Camille hugged her, her own tears mingling with Leia's. "When can we see them?" Camille asked, her voice choked with emotion. Soon, Marie replied. Let them rest a bit. I'll call you as soon as it's possible. The next few hours passed in a blur of coffee, whispered conversations, and silent prayers. When they were finally allowed to enter the recovery room, Leah and Camille hesitated at the door, almost afraid of what they might find. Henri and Etienne lay in bed side by side, connected to monitors and tubes. Despite the pallor and evident exhaustion, there was a peace in their faces that hadn't been there before. Leah approached her father, taking his hand gently. Papa, she called softly. To her joy and surprise, Henri's eyes opened slowly. He blinked a few times, focusing on his daughter's face. Ma petite étoile, he murmured, a genuine smile on his pale lips. Leah sobbed with joy, kissing her father's hand. You're back, she whispered. On the other side of the room, Camille watched her own father, a complex mix of emotions on her face. Henri, gathering his strength, looked at Etienne and then back at Leah. The documents, he said, his voice hoarse. In the safe, there's more. Leah frowned, confused. More? What do you mean, Papa? Henri took a deep breath, preparing to reveal a secret he had kept for years. I kept copies, evidence of the fraud, of everything, to protect myself, in case they came after me again. A shocked silence fell over the room. Camille looked at Leah, her eyes wide. But now, Henri continued, his voice gaining strength, now I know what I must do. With visible effort, Henri reached for the bedside table where Leah had placed the documents they found in the safe. With trembling hands, he picked up the papers. Leah, help me, he asked. Confused, Leah helped her father sit up a bit. To everyone's shock, Henri began to tear the documents. Papa, what are you doing? Leah exclaimed, trying to stop him. Henri smiled, a glow of peace in his eyes. Forgiving, he said simply. It's Christmas, ma chérie. Time for new beginnings. Camille watched the scene, tears silently streaming down her face. She turned to her father, noticing that Etienne had opened his eyes and was watching everything with an expression of shock and incredulity. Henri, Etienne managed to say, his voice barely a whisper. Why? Henri looked at his old friend and rival. Because carrying this burden for so many years almost destroyed me. And I don't want that for you. For your daughter or for mine. It's time to let the past go. Marie, who had entered the room silently, watched the scene with a mix of admiration and emotional professionalism. She knew she was witnessing something extraordinary, a true Christmas miracle that went beyond medicine. As the last pieces of paper fluttered to the floor like improvised confetti, a reverent silence fell over the room. The air seemed lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted not just from the shoulders of those present, but from the very hospital itself. Leah, with tears in her eyes, looked at the scattered papers, then at her father, and finally at Etienne. She approached Camille, who was cradling her baby, and hugged her tightly. It's over, Leah whispered. It's finally over. Outside, the bells of a distant church began to toll, announcing the arrival of Christmas Day. Inside the hospital room, a group of unlikely individuals faced the dawn of a new era in their lives, united by an act of forgiveness they would never forget. Etienne looked at the people around him. Henri, the friend he had betrayed and who now offered him a second chance. Leah, a young girl whose strength and compassion had touched him deeply. Camille, his daughter, who was growing into a remarkable woman despite his mistakes. And Marie, whose silent support and professional dedication had been a constant comfort. He knew that the path ahead would be difficult. There would be consequences to face, truths to reveal to the world, but for the first time in years, Etienne felt truly at peace. Merry Christmas, he said softly, raising his cup of coffee in an impromptu toast. Merry Christmas, the others echoed, their faces lit up with genuine smiles. Outside, the snow continued to fall softly, blanketing the city in a pure and gentle white. Inside the hospital Saint-Cœur, a group of unlikely individuals celebrated not just Christmas, but the rebirth of hope, the power of forgiveness, and the promise of redemption. The hospital room, which just days ago had been a battleground of emotions and secrets, now exuded a tangible tranquility. The soft light of the winter sun filtered through the curtains, bathing the occupants in a warm and tender golden glow. Etienne and Henri, lying in beds side by side, recovered slowly. Their gazes occasionally met, filled with a complex mix of emotions: regret, gratitude, and a growing spark of hope. Leah sat between the two beds, her gaze alternating between her father and the man who, against all odds, had saved him. Her fingers absently played with a torn piece of paper, a reminder of Henri's surprising act of forgiveness. "I still can't believe you did that, Papa," she murmured, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled in the room. Henri smiled weakly, reaching out to touch his daughter's hand. "Sometimes, ma petite étoile, forgiveness is the greatest gift we can give, not just to others, but to ourselves." From across the room, Camille watched the scene with tear-filled eyes. She approached her father's bed, hesitant. "Dad," she began, her voice trembling slightly. I think I understand now. What you did was wrong, but what you're doing now is brave." Etienne felt a wave of emotion wash over him. He reached out, and Camille took his hand, squeezing it gently. "Thank you, ma chérie," he whispered. "And I promise that I will strive to be the father you deserve." At that moment, Marie entered the room, bringing with her an aura of calm professionalism. She checked the vital signs of both patients, a small smile playing on her lips. "You both are recovering remarkably," she commented, her gaze lingering a bit longer on Etienne. There was something in the way Marie looked at Etienne that did not go unnoticed by Camille. The young woman arched an eyebrow, a mischievous smile forming on her face. When Marie finished her checks and was about to leave, Etienne called her softly. "Marie, thank you for everything." Marie paused, turning to face him. There was a vulnerability in her eyes that she rarely allowed others to see. "Etienne, She hesitated, conscious of the others in the room. "Perhaps we could talk later." Etienne nodded, a warmth spreading in his chest. "I would like that." As Marie left, Camille couldn't contain a smile. "Dad, I think you have an admirer." Etienne blushed slightly, something that made Henri laugh softly. Who would have thought the great Etienne Dupont blushing like a schoolboy? The light moment was a welcome break in the tension of the past days. For a moment, they were just a group of people sharing a moment of joy. But reality soon reasserted itself. Etienne cleared his throat, his face assuming a serious expression. "Henri," he began, turning to face his old friend. "We need to talk. Really talk." Henri nodded, preparing himself for the conversation he knew would be difficult but necessary. Leah and Camille exchanged glances, silently agreeing to give the two men some privacy. They stood up, murmuring something about getting coffee, and left the room. In the corridor, Leah let out a sigh, heavy with the weight of recent revelations and promises. "Do you think they'll be okay?" she asked Camille. Camille put her arm around Leah's shoulders. "I think they finally have the chance to be okay. For real." Inside the room, Etienne and Henri faced each other, years of pain, regret, and misunderstandings hanging between them. "I'm sorry," Etienne began, his voice choked with emotion. "For everything, for the dismissal, for believing the lies, for not fighting for you." Henri listened in silence, allowing Etienne to pour out years of repressed guilt. "I should have trusted you," Etienne continued. "You were my friend, my best employee, but I let fear and ambition blind me." Henri finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Etienne, I spent years hating you, blaming you for everything that went wrong in my life. But the truth is, I made mistakes too. I should have fought harder, should have trusted that the truth would come out." The two men fell silent, letting the words hang in the air between them. "When did you find out the truth?" Henri asked finally. Etienne closed his eyes, remembering. "A few years ago, but then it seemed too late. I was too deeply entangled in the lie to know how to get out of it without destroying everything." Henri nodded, understanding. "And now?" Etienne opened his eyes, a determination shining in them. "Now I'm going to do what I should have done a long time ago. I'm going to confess everything. Face the consequences of my actions. You know what that means, don't you? Henri asked softly. You could lose everything. Etienne smiled sadly. I already lost what really mattered a long time ago, Henri. My integrity, my peace of mind. Maybe it's time to reclaim them. At that moment, the door opened again. Leah and Camille entered, carrying cups of coffee and small packages. Sorry to interrupt, Leah said hesitantly, but, well, it's Christmas, and we thought maybe we could celebrate a bit, even here. Camille held up one of the packages. We managed to get some cookies from the cafeteria. Not exactly a festive banquet, but Henri smiled, reaching out his arms for his daughter. It's perfect, ma petite étoile. Etienne looked at Camille, seeing in her not just his daughter, but a young woman who was strong and compassionate. Come here, he called softly. Camille sat on the edge of his bed, looking at him with eyes shining with unshed tears. Camille, I know I've disappointed you in so many ways, he began, but I want you to know that I'm proud of you, of the woman you've become, of the choices you're making, and I promise to be by your side, no matter what happens. Camille felt tears well up in her eyes, even when I'm a teenage single mum. Etienne smiled, pulling her into a hug. Especially then. We'll face this together. Marie chose this moment to enter, bringing more treats she had managed to gather. She paused, looking at the family scene with a soft smile. I hope I'm not interrupting, she said. Etienne reached out a hand, inviting her to join them. Not at all. Come, join our little impromptu celebration. As the group shared cookies and coffee, talking and laughing softly, the spirit of Christmas filled the room. It wasn't the traditional celebration with a decorated tree and wrapped presents, but it was, in many ways, much more meaningful. Etienne looked at the people around him. Henri, the friend who had offered him a second chance. Leah, a young girl whose strength and compassion had touched him deeply. Camille, his daughter, who was growing into an incredible woman despite his mistakes. And Marie, whose presence had become a comforting constant. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult. There would be consequences to face, truths to reveal to the world, but for the first time in years Etienne felt truly at peace. Merry Christmas, he said softly, raising his cup of coffee in a toast. Merry Christmas, the others echoed, their faces lit up with genuine smiles. The snow continued to fall softly outside, blanketing Paris in a white and silent shroud. Inside Henri Moreau's cozy home, the warmth of the fireplace and the scent of cinnamon and pine created a festive and welcoming atmosphere. It was Christmas Eve again, but this time, everything was different. A year had passed since the dramatic events at the Hospital Saint-Cœur, a year of changes, challenges, and, above all, growth. Henri, now fully recovered, moved around the room with a renewed energy. His eyes sparkled with a vitality that had been missing for far too long. He adjusted a garland on the mantelpiece before turning to greet Etienne and Marie. Welcome, welcome, he exclaimed, opening his arms to receive them. Etienne entered, carrying a pile of presents. His face, though more lined with worry than a year ago, exuded a genuine smile. Henri, my friend, Merry Christmas. Marie followed, her eyes shining with happiness as she watched the interaction between the two men. Whoever saw them now would never guess the tumultuous past they shared. Leah emerged from the kitchen, carrying a tray of freshly baked cookies. At 13, she seemed more mature, as if the events of the past year had made her grow beyond her age. Uncle Etienne, Aunt Marie, she exclaimed, setting the tray down to hug them. The term of endearment made Etienne smile, still marveling at the forgiveness and affection he had received from this family. Where's Camille? Leah asked, looking around anxiously. As if on cue, the door opened, and Camille entered, carrying a small bundle in her arms. Her face, though tired, radiated a serene happiness. Sorry we're late, she said softly. Someone needed a last-minute change. Everyone gathered around Camille, eager to see the newest member of the family. The baby, just 2 weeks old, slept peacefully, oblivious to the attention she was receiving. Oh, Camille, Marie whispered, gently touching the baby's cheek. She's perfect. Etienne looked at his daughter and granddaughter with eyes filled with tears. The past year had been a roller coaster of emotions and hard-won redemptions. After his public confession, he had faced the legal consequences of his actions. There were trials, hefty fines, and a stint in prison. The DuPont Industries, once his pride and joy, was dismantled and sold. But amid the chaos and public humiliation, Etienne found something he hadn't expected: freedom. Freedom from the weight of secrets, freedom to rebuild his life on more solid values. "Let's all gather around the table," Henri called, breaking the moment of reflection. "Dinner is served." As they settled around the festive table, Leia couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed. Her father, once sick and embittered, now radiated health and contentment. In the past months, he had dedicated himself to a charity project, helping families affected by corporate fraud. It was his way of turning past pain into something positive. Etienne, for his part, had turned to philanthropy after serving his sentence. Using the remaining resources and his business acumen, he established a foundation focused on ethical entrepreneurship and support for small business owners. "A toast," Henri proposed, raising his glass, "to second chances and new beginnings." Everyone raised their glasses, the clinking of crystal echoing through the warm room. As the meal progressed, filled with laughter, shared stories, and the occasional tear, Leia felt a deep sense of gratitude. A year ago, she couldn't have imagined this scene: her father healthy, Etienne a part of their lives, and a new baby bringing joy to them all. After dinner, as they gathered in the living room, Etienne cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. "Marie and I have an announcement to make," he said, holding Marie's hand. His eyes shone with a mix of nervousness and happiness. We're engaged." A chorus of congratulations filled the room. Camille hugged her father and future stepmother, tears of joy in her eyes. "It's about time," she teased. Leia watched the scene with a smile. It was amazing how in just a year, people who were practically strangers had become a close-knit family. Later, as the night wore on, Henri pulled Etienne aside for a quiet conversation. His face took on a serious expression. "There's something I need to tell you," he began, his voice low. "Remember the proof we destroyed in the hospital?" Etienne felt his heart race. "Yes," he replied cautiously. "I kept a digital copy," Henri admitted, "as insurance, in case they came after me again." Etienne looked at his friend, a mix of emotions crossing his face. "Henri, No, don't worry," Henri interrupted, pulling a USB drive from his pocket. "I don't plan to use it. In fact," he handed the drive to Etienne, "I want you to destroy it completely." Etienne took the drive, feeling the symbolic weight of the object in his hand. "Why?" he asked softly. Henri smiled. "Because I trust you, my friend, and because it's time to truly let the past go." With tears in his eyes, Etienne embraced Henri. It was an embrace that spoke of forgiveness, renewed trust, and a friendship that had survived the worst storms. Leia, watching from a distance, felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She approached Camille, who was cradling her baby, a look of contentment on her face. "It's incredible, isn't it?" Leia commented. "How much has changed in a year?" Camille nodded, a soft smile on her lips. "Sometimes I think I'm dreaming, that I'll wake up and it will all be like it was before." "But it won't," Leia said with conviction. "We've grown, all of us." The two friends fell silent, contemplating the future that lay ahead of them. As the night wore on, the room filled with the sound of laughter, conversation, and the occasional cry of the baby. It was the sound of a family, not bound by blood, but by something equally strong: shared experiences, forgiveness, and unconditional love. At midnight, as the clock struck the new year, the group gathered around the Christmas tree. Etienne looked at each face, his heart full of gratitude and hope. "To redemption," he said, raising his glass. "To family," Camille added softly. "To the future," Leia completed, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "To love," Marie concluded, her hand entwined with Etienne's. As the new day dawned, bringing with it the promise of a new year and countless possibilities, the family huddled together, their hearts full and spirits renewed. The journey hadn't been easy, and the path ahead would still have its challenges. But together they knew they could face anything. For they had discovered the deepest truth of all, that love, forgiveness, and the courage to begin again are the greatest miracles of all. And so, as the new day broke, casting a golden light over the snow-covered landscape, the family stepped into the future with open hearts and renewed spirits, ready to embrace whatever adventures lay ahead.